Welcome to another episode of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw. I'm a licensed real estate broker and realtor in Santa Clara County, California, and I am the Rebel Broker. Welcome to it, folks. We have got what I think is, if there's one show so far this year that if you decided you only wanted to listen to one Real Estate Realities podcast, this would be the one. Particularly if you're someone who lives in California and sort of deals with all the craziness that goes on here, this would be the one I think you need to understand the most, because we're going to lay out a problem that exists. We're going to talk about where we are, and then we're going to talk about where the plan seems to be for us to go. So buckle up, get comfortable, pull out your favorite adult beverage of choice, because man, are you going to need it, because this one is absolutely insane. Today, what we're going to talk about is, how does California, here's the problem. So let's put it into three buckets. We'll put it into the where we were and where we are and where we're going. And that last bucket is should be the solutions bucket, right? The where we're going bucket should be, given what we've learned in bucket one and bucket two, how do we solve that problem? So here, let me line up for you what the problem is. And this is some data that's actually just mind-blowing. It's something we've talked about on the podcast before, and that is migration out of... Welcome to another episode of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw. I'm a licensed real estate broker and realtor in Santa Clara County, California, and I am the Rebel Broker. Welcome to it, folks. We have got... what I think is, if there's one show so far this year that if you decided you only wanted to listen to one Real Estate Realities podcast, this would be the one. Particularly if you're someone who lives in California and sort of deals with all the craziness that goes on here, this would be the one I think you need to understand the most, because we're going to lay out a problem that exists. We're going to talk about where we are, and then we're going to talk about where the plan seems to be for us to go. So buckle up, get comfortable, pull out your favorite adult beverage of choice, because man, are you going to need it, because this one is absolutely insane. Today, what we're going to talk about is, how does California, here's the problem. So let's put it into three buckets. We'll put it into the where we were and where we are and where we're going. And that last bucket is should be the solutions bucket, right? The where we're going bucket should be, given what we've learned in bucket one and bucket two, how do we solve that problem? So here, let me line up for you what the problem is. And this is some data that's actually just mind-blowing. It's something we've talked about on the podcast before, and that is migration out of California. Now, this is something I've covered on the podcast regularly. For those of you who've been listening for, I think maybe the first time I mentioned this was 2014, 2015, may have been when we first started discussing this. I don't recall when we exactly started talking about it, but we would spend a couple of shows a year discussing it and lamenting the fact that the numbers of people who wanted to get out of the state was growing every single year. I seem to remember the first show we were talking about how it was 20 or 30%. And back in the olden days, back in the 90s, that number was in the teens. It was like 12%, 13%, 14%. But what we have seen is this dramatically escalating number of people who want to get out of the state. And the last time we ran numbers on this, the last time I saw numbers come out of attitudes, not who actually left, but attitudes, was over 50%. And this was, at the time, my specific interest was, who's in Santa Clara County, which is my home county, that want to leave, and not just leave Santa Clara County, but leave the state of California altogether. And it was over 50%. And said if they could, they would. And if I'm not mistaken, these numbers actually predated COVID on some of these 50% numbers. And think about what happened when COVID hit. Think about the opportunity that COVID presented when so many companies went to remote work. And suddenly, you didn't have to drive into an office every day. And I can recall helping people sell homes or discuss options on their homes relating to either selling it or renting it or whatever. And they were moving to Portland, and they were moving to Seattle, and they were moving to Phoenix. They were moving out of the state and continuing to work for a company in California. So lots of firsthand knowledge in terms of ground truth, what I was seeing, and statistical data indicating even before COVID came around over 50%. So let's keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to try to accumulate some data here to see where it takes us. Now, for those of you who are listening to the podcast in audio only, I'm going to try to share with you all these numbers. But if you're interested in seeing graphical representations of these numbers, head over to YouTube and check out today's podcast in the video version, because we're covering some numbers here, and I think it's worth grokking what we're dealing with. So let's first start with where we were. Right? Back in January, Governor Newsom was very proud of the surplus of money that California had, to the tune of about, 21 billion, I think was the number. Just looking to make a correction here where it wasn't 21 billion. The unprecedented surplus was 97.5 billion. I decided to go back and double check it as I said that. And sure enough, it was nearly 100 billion that turned into a deficit. Was the number. We'll see here in a minute. I've got several articles on queue for us to check out, but I believe it was about 21 billion. Here we are less than 6 months later, and we have a deficit. We have a shortfall of over 30 billion, and that number is just growing. Every time I see a new article come out, the number gets bigger. We had a shortfall of 25 billion, then it was 29 billion. Now the last one I heard was 32 billion. And I don't think we go anywhere but up in terms of shortfalls in money. And the numbers we're going to discuss, the realities that we're going to discuss right now, lay the groundwork for this that I think will blow your mind. So let's go ahead and hit the first one. And this chart is one that's based on data from the IRS. And the source on that one is actually a new, we'll discuss it here in a minute. But this is actually a screen grab of a YouTube video, which I will link to in the description to give them fair acclamation on this one. And let's keep in mind that this data that I'm discussing here talks about AGI, which is adjusted gross income. And the reason why we're using that term is it's very specific because this is IRS data. And adjusted gross income is what your taxes are based on. There's a line on your IRS tax return that says AGI, adjusted gross income. And this is the base amount of money that would be getting taxed by the state. Now, the chart I have here shows 2017 to 2021. We do not have the 2022 data, but we're gonna chat about that in a second. So 2017, it looks like about 25 billion. And remember, this is a cumulative net number. Right? This is not in isolation. These are numbers taken in the context of other ins and outs of people and increases or decreases in AGI, but it's a cumulative thing. So in other words, in 2018, you are still living with the amount of money that is not coming in via AGI in 2017. So it's cumulative. In 2017, it looks like we had about 25 billion. In 2018, it looks like about another 25 billion, maybe a little bit more, maybe 30 billion. In 2019, definitely a bigger number, probably closer to 40 or 45 billion. 2020, definitely an increase. It looks like if you added 2017 and 18 together, you would get the number that it increased in 2020. And then in 2021, it looks like it goes up again, where if you were to add up the numbers from, again, 2017 and 18 plus a little more, that's what you would get for 2021. And then you stack all of that on top of each other, right? So that's what we're seeing. Here's 2017. And I get that folks who are listening on the podcast can't see it. But in your head, imagine about 25 billion in 2017. Imagine another 25 billion, maybe 29, 30 billion. And then maybe 35 billion in 2019, and it's accumulating, right? So the number gets higher and higher until it starts to reach 200 billion total as of 2021. So as we review all of these numbers, and if you want to get a rundown on this, again, you can check the link in the description below for the YouTube video. So if you want to see that link, you can, if you're listening on the podcast, you can go to the show notes for the podcast at soldbyrobert.com. Or you can go to the YouTube channel and click on the link in the description to go to the other video to see what's going on here. But the bottom line is adjusted gross income, loss of nearly $200 billion. So if you want to explain real quickly where we suddenly went from having a surplus to having a deficit, these are numbers that absolutely feed that beast and make it real clear where it went. It went to lost adjusted gross income on the part of taxpayers. But now let's take a look at who are these taxpayers. This chart, the numbers we're going to review now are the percentage of California's lost adjusted gross income from people with annual incomes of $200,000 or more. People across the country may be stunned at the idea of even focusing on $200,000, but I think that that's a good number to focus on because here in Silicon Valley, 200,000 is sort of that next level. There's definitely a dividing line between 200,000 and everybody else, but there's an awful lot of small business owners where this is going to cover them. There's an awful lot of folks that are at that point where these are clearly folks who pay a big chunk of taxes in California, right? So if we look at 2018, so we're not even talking about 2017, 32.4% of the people who left the state had over $200,000 in annual income. In 2019, that number jumped to 44%. In 2020, that number jumped to 58.6%. So over half of the people who left in terms of adjusted gross income. And remember, how do we know this? Because every year you file your taxes, you are including your state of residency, right? So the IRS is a very, very clear and precise way of determining these numbers. So this isn't a guess. This isn't some tinfoil hat thing that's coming out of left field. It's just the straight up numbers, and almost 60% in 2020 were over $200,000 adjusted gross income individuals. In 2021, that number jumped to 68.9. It jumped a full 10% plus in 2021. So let's ask ourselves a question. So nearly 70% in 2021 had an adjusted gross income of over $200,000. Do we believe that the year 2022 will see a reversal in this trend? Do we believe that magically the cumulative adjusted gross income number that we reviewed a minute ago will go down, or will it go up? Well, in my mind, I don't think there is any question, particularly if we mix my anecdotal ground experience of talking to people who are leaving the state, right? When you're listing your home, you're going to move. And the number of those people who are talking to me about their options, whether it's to list the home or keep it and rent it or whatever they're doing, those folks are out. These folks are leaving. And it's been an increasing number of people each year in terms of the percentage of the people I talk to. In fact, I cannot think of a single person I've talked to this year about the possibility, except with one exception. I had one exception where someone sold their home locally and bought another home in the same larger area, but stayed in California. Everybody else is leaving the state. They don't want to be here anymore. Do we think either one of these numbers, whether it's the percentage of people who make over $200,000 or simply the overall number of adjusted gross income, do we believe either one of those numbers is going to go down in 2022? I don't. I don't see any reason to theorize that that number will go down. So that's the groundwork, right? That's the data that just simply exists and is. So where does that leave us? We are faced with a problem. And the other part of this equation is companies that are leaving California. So in other words, an organization that leaves means not only do you lose the taxes for all of those, for that company, but you also lose the taxes that were being paid by all of their employees. Assuming some percentage of, not all of their employees, some percentage will stay, some percentage will move with the company, but then another percentage will become unemployed and may, given today's reality, have trouble finding another job. So let's take a moment to pause and think about that for a second. The next thing I want to share with you Every company that's left California from 2020 to 2023. And we know that's just a small snapshot, right? Again, on previous podcasts, I've discussed companies that have left California. So this is just a list of companies that have decided we're done. We're not staying in California. And I actually, if you checked out this month's Coffee and Real Estate last weekend, we did a bit of a chat about this. I wanted to also do it as a podcast, so I'd make it to definitely reach out with folks with this data. But it's important enough that I think it's worth covering both in the Coffee and Real Estate monthly show and in its own podcast, just because I think an awful lot of attention needs to be focused on this. And it gives us the company and the state that they moved to, and we can see here. There are some that have been here that were started and began here. Kelly Moore Paints. Technical companies, right? High tech companies that have left. Redaptive went to Colorado. Home manufacturers. McAfee has been here forever and has gone to Texas. Blue Vine is a banking solutions company that has now moved to New Jersey. Boingo Wireless moved to Texas. The reason why I'm mentioning high tech firms is because the mystique of Silicon Valley has evaporated. In the wide, and I have quite a few folks who are into the venture capitalist world, et cetera, et cetera. It used to be, if you wanted to be a successful high-tech company, whether it was because of the prestige of the address or access to venture capitalists or whatever else, you needed to be in Santa Clara County, right? You needed to be whatever the name of that street was in Mountain View, that all the venture capitalists were on. There was a time in the early 90s or mid 90s when all the venture capitalists were on this same street in Mountain View, California. And if you weren't on that street, you weren't an active venture capitalist. And that mystique that you have to be in Silicon Valley vibe is evaporating quickly under the stress of it's too expensive to be here. Allspring Global Investments, Trimble, Virtua Health. And there's a few shockers on this list that we'll get to in a second, because some of these companies are founding members of what turned Silicon Valley into Silicon Valley. Now, Tesla obviously was a very public move out of California. Let's see here. HomeLight, a real estate company I've actually worked with in the past, moved to Arizona. Kaiser Aluminum started right here and moved to Tennessee. Let's see. Green Dot, Align, Digital Realty, Lion Real Estate Group, Charles Schwab, Oracle. See, this was the first one I wanted to hit. Oracle in 2020, in December of 2020, left and went to Texas. And Oracle, as a high-tech company, was, I would consider it, one of the founding fathers. Now, there's another founding member of what made Silicon Valley on this list. Tanium, Hewlett-Packard, HP. HP was absolutely one of the founding members, to the point where, if I'm not mistaken, they started in a garage in Palo Alto somewhere. And they're gone. They're out as of December of 2020. They are not here. Let's see. Pabst, Blue Ribbon, Incora, Palantir. And again, the reason I'm pointing this out, the reason why I'm pointing out particularly Norton LifeLock, another one, the reason why I'm pointing these out is because these are high-tech companies that are no longer buying into the idea that to be a successful high-tech company, you need to be in Santa Clara County. So just keep that in mind, right? Because I think one key element that has preserved living or high-tech being in Santa Clara County has been this mystique that to be participating in high tech, this is where you got to be. This is where it's happening. Like, if you want to act, you got to go to Hollywood or New York, right? That's kind of been the thing. Will that continue to be true to some degree? Yeah, but as that gets diminished and other areas are seen as tech hubs, Colorado is emerging as a tech hub. Tennessee is emerging as a tech hub. The area around Charlotte, North Carolina is becoming a tech hub. These are areas that now compete with Silicon Valley in terms of prestige. So just something to keep in mind. So here we are. We've defined the problem. We're not only losing individuals who don't want to be here, we're losing companies that don't want to be here. And this is something I talked about in a podcast, I think maybe 2 years ago. The folks working for the state will say, hey, no big deal. We've got new companies being created all the time. Well, I don't want to trade a Fortune 500 company or a Fortune 100 or a Fortune 50 company with thousands of employees for the 3-guy company that's starting up in California. And I don't think you do either, because none of that's going to replace the taxes you've just lost, right? If they do the math on what they're losing versus what's replacing it, they are losing billions of dollars. It's not even a discussion. It is just a financial reality, right? So what has gotten us here? Well, a lot of dumb things for those of you who live here, whether it's taxation or regulation, whatever. But the short version is political interference. I guess we could just put it all under that heading. Whether it's taxes or regulation, that's the thing. And when talked to, when surveys are done of these big companies and why they're leaving, those are the top 2 things. Oppressive taxes and overwhelming regulation that prevents innovation. And the creepy thing is, if you go and you watch the video that I've linked to in the description of the show today, they've done surveys of companies that are still in California that are thinking about moving. When they start having conversations with these CEOs, what they find is that 50% of CEOs are considering leaving California in the future, and they talk about high taxes and burdensome regulations. And this is this year's stuff. This is recent conversations that they've had. 1/3 of the folks they talk to, again, you can check it out, link in the description below for the video that covers this. 1/3 have plans in place right now to leave California. Now, if you're making actual plans, that includes things like picking a new site, picking a new city, right? If there are actual plans in place to do it, that is something that should be concerning when you consider that 30% of the businesses surveyed had such a plan. So that's the reality that you're faced. If you are a politician and you're trying to survey the lay of the land, you're trying to figure out, all right, here's where we are. We're losing money hand over fist. We've gone from a surplus to a deficit, a shortfall. How do we fix it? Now, here's some other articles here. California's budget deficit may be even larger than predicted. This is from February 23rd. 8 months ago, energized by projections of a nearly $100 billion surplus, Governor Gavin Newsom and the legislature wrote a $307 billion budget that lavished money on new and expanded services and rebated billions of dollars back to taxpayers. Now, of course, on this show, when we first got reports that there was going to be a surplus, the very first thing that I suggested and that some folks who commented to me about that show after the fact was, we should be putting a rainy day fund together for this. We should not simply be spending that. That would not make a whole lot of sense, but everyone wanted to spend it right up. But as of January, and it was the beginning of January, the last time I heard Newsom bragging about it, it was early January. By the end of January, beginning of February, Newsom had to note that on paper, the surplus had suddenly morphed into what he said was a $22.5 billion deficit due to sharp declines in tax revenues. And we all know this number is no longer 22.5 billion, but now at least 30 billion. So we will see. This is obviously an article that was written in February, so it doesn't have the latest data. But the reality is it's way more now. Another headline from the Mercury News, how Newsom solves California budget that went from $97.5 billion surplus to $31.5 billion deficit. Now, the one good thing that has come out of this is the very first knee-jerk reaction on the part of those in Sacramento was to raise taxes across the board. And to his credit, Newsom has pushed back on that idea, primarily because one of the reasons why everyone wants to leave is because of taxes. So let's take it from the we want to solve this problem perspective. If you want to solve this problem and you are self-aware enough to recognize that the problems are regulation and taxes, should your response be more taxes and regulation? I would say no. I would say maybe it's time to embrace the Laffer curve. For some of you who aren't familiar with the economist Laffer, He came up with the Laffer curve in the 80s, which showed a graph of how much you make in taxes versus the rate of taxes being charged. And it showed that at a certain point, you start, even though you can raise rates infinitely up to, I guess, 100%, in some places, there are places where actually rates are 110% based on how much you've saved, but that's a whole other kind of conversation to have. You start to make less with higher tax rates. And we've reached that point in California because people can vote with their feet. And this is the way it should be, right? We should have a scenario where you have a bunch of different states doing a bunch of different things and see who succeeds and fails based on what they do. And we are failing as a state. So clearly we've hit this point on the Laffer curve, if you believe in the Laffer curve at all, where we are charging too much. And what you find statistically is if you lower rates, you become an attractive place for businesses to operate with lower taxes and lower regulation. Those businesses come back, so the pool of folks that you're drawing from increases. And you always want to start with attracting businesses, because with businesses comes their employees, right? Maybe people who had lower paying jobs now get higher paying jobs because there's new companies that need their skills. So your tax base, your AGI goes up. The adjusted gross income goes up. But you want to start with attracting businesses because they're going to attract employees. They're going to attract new taxpayers. So it's not just how much you're making from the company, it's how much you're making from all the people they hire. So you want to create an environment where those businesses can hire more and more people. And typically the best way to do that is to take less of their money so they can use that money to hire people. And then those people become contributors to your tax base. So what is the response? Well, first, California wealth and exit taxes. California wants to pass a wealth tax, which it absolutely could, which would hit folks who make an awful lot of money. But for those folks who make an awful lot of money, what is another thing that having a lot of money gives you? Infinite mobility. If suddenly someone tells you that in order to stay in this state, you're going to have to pay an extra 1.5% on any wealth over $1 billion. And remember who these people are. I realize there's this let's make them the evil people vibe that goes on. But if you're a person who has $1 billion, the odds are you're not just stuffing that into a mattress in your house and rolling around in it at night. The odds are the reason you have that $1 billion is because you've been willing to take risks on various investments that then feed other companies that do things that allow the economy to grow. You're an economy feeder, typically, if you're someone at that wealth level. Now, over the course of my real estate career, I have been lucky enough to meet a few people who meet this criteria. And in every case, granted, it's not tons. I don't know every billionaire in California. I do know a couple right here in Santa Clara County. And these are folks who are fueling new business, fueling the hiring of people. So I can't testify to billionaires across the country, but I can testify to a handful of them right here in Santa Clara County. And these are folks who take that money and contribute well beyond just the fact that they make a huge amount of money. They invest, they get a decent return, but that money that's been invested is being used by other companies and individuals to grow various markets. And I'll tell you what, I would much rather have that money remain in the hands of a billionaire who's going to actively participate in the business market than the state. Because there it just ends. That money just goes to die with the state on all the various stupid things. And for every dollar that the state takes in, how much do you suppose of that money actually comes out in actual goods or services at the other end? It's hard to call it services, but how much of it do you think actually gets used? How much gets absorbed by the political machine before it actually comes out the other end as something the state does? Whether that's pay a construction crew to fix a road or to build a new bridge. It sure isn't $1. I mean, if for every dollar, how much do we probably get? 30 cents? For every dollar that a billionaire turns around and invests, real close to 100% of that dollar is going into whatever he's putting it into. Now, are they going to take profit out? Sure. Maybe 20%. I know a lot of investors say 10 is their minimum, but let's double it. Even at 20%, we're still way better off than what it costs the state to take that money, to seize that money from income earners. So the group that you want to stay the most is the group you are pissing off first and encouraging them to leave. And it's happening, right? We're seeing an exodus of high income earners. If you think $200,000 or more people are at increasing rates making the decision to get the heck out of California, you can bet your bottom dollar that there are billionaires to this, perhaps at the same percentage, looking to leave. And all they have to do is change their residency. They may still pay those property taxes on that house that they have in Malibu or whatever, or in Los Altos Hills, wherever that house may be, but they just won't have that be their residence anymore. They'll live somewhere else. But now we can talk about the exit tax, because not only do we make it worse by suggesting we do a wealth tax, now we want to impose an exit tax that says if you move away and you make more than a certain amount of money, we're going to charge you a certain amount. We're going to tax you. And some versions of this I've seen indicate it's not a one-time tax. It's a tax that would potentially hit you over the course of the following some number of years. And some folks I've talked to are saying 3 to 5 years, and some folks are saying as much as 10 years. That may only apply to some businesses. I have no idea. But the fact, let's pretend that there isn't multiple years involved. Let's just pretend there's 1 year involved. That is enough. So what you're doing is telegraphing to high income earners, get out as quickly as you possibly can before these laws get passed. What sense does that make? Right? All this does is accelerate the mass exodus of people out of California. At the income range you absolutely do not want to lose. I've got a couple of, again, there will be links to all of these articles provided at the bottom in the show notes, down at the bottom of the show notes. So feel free to check those out. It's absolutely nuts, but there is an actual bill here. Now, my feeling is that the exit tax won't stand a constitutional challenge. The idea that you could tax someone who is now no longer a resident of your state based on their income that's being earned while not in the state is ridiculous to me. And my belief is that it would be constitutionally challenged under interstate commerce, right? You're restricting interstate commerce by doing this punitive thing when people relocate. So my guess is that might be I'm not a lawyer, but under the auspices of intrastate commerce, a lot of other things have been done. And my feeling is this would probably be one of those things. But and it wouldn't surprise me if it ends up not being upheld in a challenge, and California does not get to do it. Imposes this was the part I wanted to kind of focus on here. What is the wealth tax? A 0.4% tax on all Californian residents' worldwide net worth that exceeds $30 million. If married, taxpayers to file separately from their spouse, then this figure would be cut half down to $15,000. As you can see, where most ordinary people are concerned, this wealth tax is of no concern. Of course it is. Of course it is. Because you know what? These folks with this money are making investments. They're buying stocks. They're being venture capitalists. And if you're an individual who doesn't have that level of tax, who's looking for a job in one of these companies, there will be more jobs if these people stay. They will not if they go. Right? If they take their ball of money and say, I'm not playing, I'm out of here, I'm going away, we lose that. And people don't seem to get the connection between an active business person with large resources investing in businesses and not understanding how when that person moves, the likelihood is they will invest locally where they end up going. Some of them may still continue to invest in California, but if you have come to the conclusion, I'm leaving the state because of how oppressive it is, both tax-wise and regulatory-wise, why would you continue to invest there? I wouldn't. But then again, I'm not a billionaire, so maybe it's a completely different mindset. All right, next. Here's another one. And this one, it just contributes. It puts another log on the let's piss everybody off fire. And this is one that is particularly shocking because this one could stick. This is one that I don't think would potentially fail in a challenge, a legal challenge. It may. Again, not a lawyer, but it's a shocker. And it's the mileage tax. This is a real thing. It's not only a real thing, it's a thing to the point where there is a website to sign the petition to make them not do it. to encourage them to not do it. California's okay, and this is the usual, stuff, the usual, the wording that we've all come to expect in politics, right? No matter what side, whether I agree with them or not, I despise this kind of phrasing just because it annoys me. But we'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and read it off here. Should I do it in like a sinister voice? California's greedy. Well, no, I'm not going to do it. California's greedy politicians have already imposed the highest gas tax and car tax in the nation on drivers. Absolutely true. When those of us who live in California realize that something like 50% of what gas costs us is California taxes that have been added on, it's insane. And now they want to impose a new mileage tax to charge us per mile we drive to get more of our money. The California mileage tax proposal would require tracking every driver's mileage and charging them 4 cents per mile they drive. Think about that, folks. This one blows me away. The last time I rented a car, if I went over the mileage that was allotted, right? If it was one of those ones that wasn't unlimited miles, if I went over, they charged me 5 cents a mile as a punitive. This is only 1 cent away from the punitive car rental stuff. And imagine what this does. Imagine the mushroom effect of this. So awesome, great. You're now going to spend an extra 4 cents per mile that you drive. Do you know how many people commute 50 miles to get to work every day? So 150 miles there, 50 miles back, 100 miles a day. It's absolutely insane. And the fact that we've already paid taxes for the roads we're driving on, we've already paid taxes on the car that we've bought, we've already paid taxes on the registration for that car, and we've already paid taxes on the gas we've put into it, and for the tires that we're going to wear down driving that car, and now they want us to pay a tax just to use the road? Absolutely mind-boggling. Now, part of me hopes that this will never see the light of day, that it will never happen. But given the fact it's far enough that there's petitions to stop it, makes me think this thing has some steam. So we'll see where this goes. Our first battle in blocking the tax statewide is to oppose the pilot phase of the mileage tax that is being conducted in San Diego County. So that was the other thing I wanted to share with you. This is far enough along that they're doing it in a test case. Our goal is to generate a massive rebellion of taxpayers and drivers to punish any politician that backs the imposition of the mileage tax, even as a pilot project. If we create a public uproar during the pilot phase, California politicians will likely back down from imposing the tax statewide. At the same time we are fighting the pilot phase, we are organizing a grassroots rebellion statewide to oppose the mileage tax. We plan to make the mileage tax a key issue in every close race for local and state office in the upcoming election. So there you go. That is their solution. Let's double down. Let's take all of the tactics, strategies, and methods that we've used that have gotten us into this trouble, and let's double down on all of them. Let's piss off more people. So remember, these numbers of people that we're leaving, the 68.9% of people who make over $200,000 who left in 2021, the 4.25 billion who have been lost since 2017 to 2020 or to 2021, who made these decisions in the absence of this stupidity, of all of these extra taxes and all these other regulations they want to tack on. There is no question in my mind, this simply accelerates the process. Now, someone who I was born and raised in California, I was born in San Francisco, raised in Silicon Valley. My business is directly tied to California. It's not like I can simply get a new business license permit or whatever in another state. I have to get licensed. I have to take tests and do things, right? So it's not a simple process. But I will honestly tell you, if we get to the point where this kind of stuff starts to happen, where it starts to look like it's going to pass, I'm done. And I'm out. I will start the process to get my real estate broker's license in another state, and I'm out. And think about what that equals, right? So a lot of you folks don't realize what it takes to be in real estate in any area, right? It's about building up your reputation. It's about creating a reputation among your neighbors and the folks in your community. It's about investing in long-term marketing that obviously only pays off if I'm in the area, right? A lot of direct mail stuff I do takes 18 months to go to full maturity. So not only is this a question of, am I just done with California, but it becomes with, what about the huge expense involved in restarting my business somewhere else? And I have to think, I am not alone. If I am to the point, someone who loves what California has to offer in terms of everything but its politics, in terms of being able to go skiing in the morning, go dune buggy riding in the desert in the midday, and then swimming in the ocean in the late afternoon. I mean, that's what California offers, right? But that gets completely overwhelmed by this level of stupidity. So I would love to hear back from you. Comment below whether you are listening to the podcast, just the audio portion. You can head over to Sold by Robert. Check out the show notes below the show notes at the website soldbyrobert.com. There's a place for you to have a comment. You can reach me via Twitter. You can find it on YouTube and comment below. I want to know what you think. Are you a California resident? Is some of this news to you? If it is news to you, is this news that makes you think, I need to create an exit plan? I need an exit strategy. I would love to hear more, particularly from those of you who are also in the state. So I know I've got folks who are listeners in Sacramento. I know I've got quite a few in Southern California. Where does this leave you? How many miles a day do you drive to go to work? How much would this 4 cents per gallon or per mile? How much would this 4 cents per mile new tax hit you? And it would be something they'd make it one of those deals where wherever your registration for your car gets renewed, they log in your miles. What do you think? I would love to hear from you. Can you imagine what it would be like to suddenly go from paying a car registration fee of $150, depending on how old your car is? I mean, I know there's some folks with much bigger fees than that, but suddenly having that be $1,000 because of the miles you've driven? How about that? Is that an expense you can sustain? Particularly in a state that taxes you more than any other state, that has crazy inflation problems, has crazy housing costs. Is that something you can easily sustain? It is so blind to the realities of what Californians face. It boggles my freaking mind. All right. I hope I have inspired some thinking. I hope the gears in your head are turning. The goal is always to leave you with more knowledge on the table than I take up in your time. Absolutely hope we've achieved that today. But I really sincerely want your feedback. I would love to hear more. So feel free to comment. As always, thanks for listening. And boy, I will talk to you next time.